Canadian Footy Corner.
All right, friends, we are back with yet another episode of Canadian Footy Corner on this beautiful, let me check my calendar here, Thursday. It's Thursday, yeah?
You got that right. February 3rd.
Sure as heck is, yes. Thursday, February 3rd. And we've got a real good show lined up for you guys today. We've got Steven Sandor is going to come on a little bit later, editor of Edify Magazine out in Edmonton. He's been following the Edmonton FC story for, well, since inception, really, having previously worked for the club, worked for their local broadcaster. He's anyone who's been around the game long enough has recognized his name from theplasticpitch.ca and his many contributions in making sure that Canadian soccer gets the press that it's due. So we'll talk to him later. We're going to talk to Chelsea Spencer and Dino Rossi from League One Ontario and kind of set up what's going on with them and the exciting news that they've had this season. But before that, man, there's some stuff to talk about. I know I'm still jacked up from last night. I'm even still wearing my Milan Borjan sweatpants here, celebrating everything that happened last night. John, man, have you calmed down? I'm still buzzing, man.
No, like not really, to be honest. Like we're 11 games in. Canada has not lost a match out of 11. I saw a stat last night in, I think it was 224 competitive matches in this final stage of CONCACAF. No team has won 6 in a row. On that includes the States, that includes Mexico. Canada's playing at just like the level of confidence and you look at the game last night and like Atiba's goal, like so kind of silly almost that goes in, but at the same time it's like when things are going your way, it's kind of like the way it is in sports sometimes. Like things are going your way and that's like one of those goals that like if you're playing FIFA and you break your controller in anger, because it's like that doesn't even make sense like physically. Like I don't know, it hit the post, it hit his foot, it hit I think the back of his head or his shoulder, and then pops perfectly up to land behind the goalie. It's just like bizarre. But then at the same time, Canada didn't even allow a goal in this grouping of games. Like it's you can't look at just that goal. Like the Borjan came up big in every game, at least one massive save. Jonathan David, cool as ice to close that game. I'm not even over the Sunday game, the USA game. It's amazing to watch. It's just amazing to watch. Like everyone's committed to the system. Like I feel like that was one of the biggest things in the US game. Like it felt like I was still trying to figure out what what was the game plan. It felt like a lot of individuals on the US team to me. It felt like I don't know. I was trying to look for like where the cohesion was.
I look at that US game and especially that US team and that team and the hype around them is just a bit much to watch from the outside, because these players, the Ricardo Pepis, the Josh Sargents, whoever, they go overseas and they're getting a lot of hype from the Americans, but you don't necessarily see that same hype from like where the clubs are located, because they're not exactly stars on those teams. No one's sitting there going, oh, Josh Sargent has 2 goals in 20 games in the Premier League.
Well, yeah,
that's a guy you're going to be able to count on, right? Like he's their big scoring threat, and he's not doing well. Like, and people go, oh, well, that's who we needed to call into camp. That's who should have been in the game. And it's just like, what?
Well, there's been so much like vitriol and hate going on with Zardes that he's had to like delete his Twitter account, because like apparently having a center forward from the MLS is like the worst thing they could do when you have Sargent available, as you just mentioned. Meanwhile, I don't know. I don't understand things like that. It's one player's fault that the States couldn't score on Canada. Meanwhile, we were executing a game plan that was quite visible, and they were running around dribbling into 3 guys as individuals. No one was like, I don't know. I don't see how that's any individual's fault on this United States team, but that's what you're seeing from some of the social media, at least.
Yeah, well, watching the U.S. men's national team fan base meltdown has been the highlight of
Oh, I've
one of
loved
the
it. I've loved
highlights
it.
between in the soccer world. That's been the highlight of my week without a doubt. But we've got a lot to talk about here on today's show, so we're going to kind of skim through that. Unless there's anything else you wanted to touch on as far as that national team game goes, it's good to see these players and everyone involved with the national federation getting the credit they're due and getting this bit of spotlight, because there's so many people who've been pulling for so long on these projects with little success, and now the fruits of their labors are beginning to bloom.
Well, it's just like even from an outsider's perspective, how can you not look at this as like a feel good story? Just like the way that this has all come about. But yeah, as
Are
you
we the
mentioned,
Jamaican bobsled team? Are we
it kind of
soccer's Jamaican bobsled team?
it kind of feels that way to me. And I feel like that, like I feel like even I want like even with how dominant we've been in this qualifying process, I still feel like, like I know it's not official yet, but like if and when Canada goes to the World Cup, like how much of an underdog is the rest of the soccer world going to be considering us, even with how dominant we've been, like taking almost full points from Mexico, taking almost full points from the US, like because it's still very unknown as a soccer nation, maybe from the global perspective.
Yeah, well, with that global perspective, let's narrow it down a little bit to what's going on in the MLS,
Sure.
because it looks like Kwame Awua is going to sign with the Whitecaps if everything's a go, because Forge have just signed Ashton Morgan, who essentially fills that same role.
Yeah, you'd think that was they're kind of expecting that to happen, given and I think that's a pretty good signing for Forge. Brings a lot of experience. Because we haven't really seen the only other move in Vancouver this week. Theo Bair going on the departures out to St. Johnstone in the Scottish League.
He was already at HamCam though, was he not?
Yeah, so last year he was at loan, second division Norwegian team, but they came first. They got promotion. He put 4 goals in for them. So I mean, from all accounts, did well out there. But I guess they've decided the next step for him is the Scottish League. Send him off on a new adventure. And so it looks like Kwame is going to sign in Vancouver because Forge has already kind of signed his replacement. It seems. In Montreal, Rudy Kamachko signs. I know when Amy Walsh was on a couple weeks ago, it was sounding like that might not have been the case. He was out of contract, and seems like, I guess,
well, he was posting on his Instagram that he was looking at NFTs on some Toronto balcony, which was, I think everyone was confused by that.
what a misdirection. But yeah, so I mean, he was their 2021 Defensive Player of the Year on the team. So I mean, like it brings stability. Like I think Montreal's got to be feeling pretty good about their D line there with Miller and now with Alistair Johnston and Bro Gilliard as well. And then you keep Camacho. So I mean, they've got some stability there at D. So I think that's probably a good signing for them. Speaking of D, the long-awaited Salcedo move to Toronto has finally become official. That one was like weeks in the making. It seems like the main discourse here, because he is coming in listed as a designated player, and it seems like a lot of people are saying like, oh, if that's a TAM signing, it's a fantastic move, but if it's a DP, it's a terrible move, and there's like a huge distinction there. Do you feel that like using that slot on a center back is a waste of a DP slot?
I think if you're using DP money on a guaranteed home run, that's what the money's there for. Yeah. Like you could spend it on I don't know, give me a list of every DP that the Whitecaps have ever signed not named Kenny Miller, and none of them, the Mustafa Jarjus of the world, like who's saying this? People who can guarantee that a player is going to fail or succeed. I think you invest your money in what you think is going to be a guaranteed success, and if you're bringing in a player of that caliber who's proven themselves, not just at like a lower tier, but has come in from a higher tier, how's that a waste of money? You've suddenly established that you've got a solidified back line. by just adding in anyone else, really, because you've got a top level performer who's going to organize your back line, speaks English, and is a proven player.
They literally nicknamed the Titan in Mexico. And then on top of that, like, I mean, this all, you know, you had to get someone to take on Soldelto's contract as well. Like that, like people weren't lining up to take that money on either. And so
I think that's the most impressive part of this whole bit of business, to be honest, am I going to sit here and disparage Soteldo? No, he was 5th in the league in assists. Like he's a good player. He was hyped up as though he was going to be the next Javinko because they're similar stature, which was unfair.
Yeah, that's I'm not as harsh on Sodelto as a lot of, like, it seemed like a very good riddance kind of vibe from like when he was finally, you know, made official. But like, I don't know, to me, like that was a tough, like you come in the middle of a season where Toronto's having, and for a team like Toronto to be like, this is one of, if not the worst season statistically that they've ever had, and you think about some of those years they've had, like no one would have saved that season the way that was going. Like he put up good numbers. The rumors are that, you know, didn't get along, you know, one of those locker room kind of issue things. But again, those are just rumors that we can't really, you know, I can only look at what I've seen on the field, and he's a talented player, but in the end, it didn't work. I personally, even like, cause like there's rumors that like maybe by July 1st, you can buy down Salcedo, sorry. And you still get that one extra DP slot. But I mean, even if he's not a full year DP, like to me, I think that's worth it. But personally, assuming he plays at the level that we have seen that he can.
What's our motto?
I think it's time will tell.
Don't think you know. I know you know.
When are we getting shirts made?
Ooh, good idea. Or coffee mugs.
Yeah. Once we go full time on the video pod.
Baby, we're already full time. What are you talking about? YouTube, baby.
I knew that.
No, you did not. You clearly didn't know that. When we start giving some shout outs here to watch the show on YouTube, get us some of that YouTube money here, folks.
We need that. What's that website that has all your links in one go?
Linktree.
Yeah, we need one of those.
Something to work on. You know, not the hardest thing to put together. We'll continue this discussion later, John. Off air, maybe. Let everyone know about how terrible we are on the back end. They already know we're terrible by listening to us. All right. Well, when you're done gathering yourself here, let's get back to the CPL, good. Huh?
I was gonna say that was where I was going. Yeah, the schedule has dropped. Couple changes from last year, and I think for the better. They're starting much earlier than last year, over almost 2 months earlier, but only finishing 1 month sooner, which means that hopefully that should alleviate some of those like mid-week games. We should get more weekend games, I would think, because they've stretched it a little bit, and they're ending late October, so hopefully the final is a little bit better weather. I don't know, were you at the Pacific Forge game? Like,
I was not.
I was cold. But I don't know. I think I like that though. Like they found a way to stretch it a bit while also ending not so late in the year. So I think that's good. Semifinals are a 2-leg affair this time around, which I think is good. So I like what we've seen from the announcement there. Still top 4. It's a what do you call it? Balanced schedule. So that's the nice thing about having 8 teams. It makes that easier.
Yeah. Well, 8 teams for now. We'll see how things play out. And on that note, we should probably get into our interview here with Steven Sandor, who's going to kind of give us the lowdown on what's actually happening and has been happening in Edmonton. And it's going to be an interesting chat. A lot of stuff to talk about. A lot of really good insights, I'm sure. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back with that in just a moment. All right, gang, we're back, and we're going to get the inside scoop from Steven Sandor, editor for Edify Magazine. He's a published author. He's put out several good children's books related to soccer and sport. He's worked for the Canadian Press, used to be the managing editor of a wonderful online publication that a lot of people are familiar with, The Plastic Pitch. He's here to give us the inner workings of what's going on, or as much as he's willing to share with us, or that he's allowed to share with us, about what's going on in Edmonton. And I'm going to kick this off right now with the last time that we've seen a tweet or anything on social media from Edmonton is from January 1st, after they announced the ownership structuring announcement that they put out. And the last article that was posted to FC Edmonton's website is from March 2021. Is this the biggest problem right now that we see in Edmonton, is a lack of communication and a lack of transparency about what's going on around this club?
Well, I think in terms of the league wanting to sell the team, I think that there is, and I'd like to say there is a massive amount of, it's tight. There's a wall around the team right now in terms of information and what's going on, and things come out in dribs and drabs and sort of by accident. So like just a week and a half ago, I noticed on one of the soccer sites I subscribe to that FC Edmonton had posted a job opening for their goalkeeping coach. So, we know, then that means Lars Hirschfeld is not going to be back as goalkeeping coach because they're hiring one right now. And there's a new ad that just went out for that. So it's kind of like that, how you find things out. I mean, we know a lot of players are not going to be coming back. And it's par for the course. And from what I've been told, and kind of what I'm hearing from the world of players, right? And it's just a general sort of what they're hearing is, right now, as long as the team is being administered by the league. And I think even in the past, in the last few weeks, I've said owned by the league, but it's being administered by the league. It's still owned by the Faths, by the Fath family, but the roster and the paychecks are being administered by the league. As long as that happens, and this has happened before when I've seen this in other sports, when the league takes over a team or takes over the administration of a team, they run it as bare bones as possible because as an owner, you don't want to pay, the owner, Bob Young at Forge, or the owners of York, or the owners of Pacific, the owners of Valor don't want to pay for FC Edmonton to beat them, right? They're going to pay for a bare bones minimum roster of warm bodies to be all intents and purposes, to be fair. So what I've heard is that FC Edmonton is not going to be paying over until they get a new owner in. Will be paying more than minimum contracts. They won't be, and then they're going to be looking for a lot of loans. Like they're going to look for a lot of loans to seed this team. So, with loans, you kind of wait till other rosters pan out, right? And then you kind of see what players go out in loans. So that's why there hasn't been a lot of news, hasn't been a lot about the team, about what's going on. But it goes par for the course. And I kind of go back to the irony that back in the NASL days, there were times when FC Edmonton was one of the teams in the Fath family that were funding teams that were in financial difficulty, and it was the Faths who were signing checks that were going to other teams. So I think the irony now is that it's FC Edmonton that's on that course. But I know from those times, those teams are always funded. Whenever you have and I challenge anyone to find me a league funded team that has ever been good. Like on the pitch or on the ice or on the court, like they're funded to basically just survive and make up the numbers. So, I mean, I think the worry would be is could the sliding scale get worse this year in Edmonton with a team that, let's say FC Edmonton wasn't great last year, but they were competitive in most matches. But what if you have a team that's not competitive? What if you have a team that is, really quite below the cut? Then you start getting into ideas about the saleability. Are you diminishing the value of the team even more? Are you making people less interested? Now I've heard, just like everyone else has, that there are some interested parties. The league has said that there's interested parties in buying the team. But until that comes to pass, this team is going to be run very frugally, and I don't think they're going to say a lot about how it's going to be run. And I think that puts everyone behind the eight ball, and I think it puts a potential new owner behind the eight ball of being so far behind when that person gets on board, or that group gets on board to try to sell tickets, to try to market a team, to build a roster. It becomes a challenge, but I've seen this before at lower level sports, and in fact saw it in Edmonton before in 2004 when the Aviators were in the USL and declared bankruptcy halfway through the season and finished the season as Edmonton FC, playing at community fields. And I still remember seeing, I think it was the Seattle Sounders, play them at a park I played men's league the night before. sitting in lawn chairs to watch a team that would eventually go on to play an MLS, a franchise. But sitting, it was very, very odd. So, and again, that team was run bare bones, just to survive and make up numbers.
Now, what's the situation with, oh gosh, it escapes me, the pitch, the field, Clark Stadium.
Mm-hmm.
Because it strikes me as a disaster, because it's just not a proper facility, or at least the changes they made to it have made it even worse for soccer. No?
Well, this goes back to an article I did for Alberta Venture Magazine, I think back in 2015, where I sat down with Tom Fath for a long period of time to talk about the profitability. And this was, back in NASL days, you're dealing with bigger salaries, a league that had whether it was the North American second division or not, had a bit of a bigger scope, bigger salaries, bigger travel budgets than CanPL does. And he told me at the time that, they're kind of in a catch-22. They're building for the future. This stadium holds a maximum of 4,100 people. But to break even, based on what FC Edmonton was spending, and of course, they used to have road trips to places like Puerto Rico and regular road trips down to Miami, which time zones away would cost a lot of money. He said they would need to sell 10,000 seats a year, to fill 10,000 seats to break even. And I'm like, well, that's a losing proposition. And I don't know what the break even is now in CanPL compared to NASL, but I'm sure that 4,000 is not the number. But the fact is that even if you fill that stadium, you're going to lose money. Right. But at the same time, it's a city-owned facility. You don't control it. It's a multi-purpose facility. It's used for many things. But at the same time, the catch-22 is when there's 500 people now at games, or even, the last couple of years, how we've seen the crowds dwindle in Edmonton. How does anyone stand in front of city council and say, this team deserves a new stadium? They'd be like, you can't sell 1,000 tickets. What on earth in today's, what's going to be a belt-tightening time post-COVID, when governments are all going to be reckoning with the billions that were spent during the COVID era to say, hey, we could build you a facility for a team that hasn't proven for years that it's been able to draw, at least since it's been moved to CanPL, that it's been able to draw a lot of fans. This is just fine for you. You got to show, and that's even when they were in NASL, that was the tone from city council. Show us that you can pack 4,000 people at a game, and you're there. There were times in NASL when the New York Cosmos came to town that they would get 3,500 to 4,000, or if they played on some Friday nights, which seemed to be the sweet spot for Edmonton, that they would get those crowds, but they weren't regular. They were still much better than they're getting in CanPL. I think the psychology of that is really interesting to the Canadian sports fan. And but I do think that it's really, really hard to get out. So there is catch-22, what I'm trying to say, the catch-22 in stadium situation. You need a better stadium to attract more fans, but you need to attract more fans to get a better stadium, right? So it's one half of one, and a half dozen of 1/6 of the other, or however you want to call it. But you're caught in this terrible kind of no man's land of government or any funder or any sponsor would say, show me your fan base. But you're saying our fan base really won't exist until we get to that new spot. So it's a very, very difficult situation.
So speaking of that, like that fan base and the struggle that FC Edmonton's had with maybe connecting, how do you gauge the temperature right now with like that group that is connected? There's this kind of like lull in information. We don't know what's happening with the ownership. There's been no roster moves. Like, are people, is it creating any sense of like apathy, or what's the feeling of those fans that are following along?
Yeah, I don't know if apathy is even a sense, because apathy just happens. But I think the apathy's been there for a long period of time now. And I think the apathy is only grown over the last year and a half. I think the interesting thing that's happened in Edmonton that might be unique is, I think the Elite Basketball League emerged at the same time as the CanPL. And I think in some other markets, in some places, like, you don't see it as much, the effect, because maybe it hasn't had the effect on soccer that I believe it's had in Edmonton. But the Edmonton Stingers are the inverse story of FC Edmonton. The Edmonton Stingers emerge in CEBL as the power team, as the elite team. And that media coverage that FC Edmonton used to have, sort of as the third team in the city after the Oilers and the CFL team, the Elks, has been replaced. They've been totally supplanted by the Stingers, because the Stingers are a better story, to be frank. They're playing in the Champions League, right, in basketball. They're playing, like this week, they're going to be playing against Nicaraguan opposition, Puerto Rican opposition again, because they've won the league 2 years in a row. They've sent a guy to the NBA in Xavier Moon. So the Stingers have these success stories that the CanPL team has not had. And so, clearly basketball has really mopped up, and it's a summer thing, and the basketball league's on CBC on the weekends, right? It's getting national coverage. It's getting far more media airtime than the soccer league does. We can argue about other cities where they both exist. And I think the interesting thing is that Media Pro does the for both, and don't get me started about how I think that One Soccer could be rebranded as a sports station and have both leagues on, because why not? You don't need to have just a soccer station. Why not celebrate 2 Canadian sports or 2 Canadian leagues and have an access point for them both in one place? I think, but I think that there's not a lot of space. Like, people only have a finite amount of time, right, on a weekend or what have you, to follow sports, or to, I think sports, they keep piling more and more and more on us, saying there's more games, more leagues, more teams, more competitions, but we all got stuff to do. We can only watch a finite or follow a finite number of leagues or sports or whatever. So a lot of times when a new team comes in, you're asking a fan to remove another team from their priority list. It's not like, oh, I squeeze that in. It's sort of like, well, I follow this now. I spend a lot less time following that thing that I used to follow. And I think FC Edmonton's felt that squeeze quite a bit. And I think that's something they have to reckon with. And I think that they need to look at maybe what the Stingers have done to be successful. One is to win. I think that's the most important thing. But I think some of the other marketing initiatives in the community and sort of copy that a little bit and say, why are they bridging that gap a lot more than we have, at least since we moved to Canadian Premier League. I think that they were doing a better job in the NASL, but I think that there was more of a budget back in the NASL to do these things and more of a impetus to get this done. I think that around CanPL, there was this kind of almost lazy feeling that FC Edmonton, as the existing team, was just going to walk in and maybe not necessarily be the best team on the field. I think people knew what Forge had kind of in reserves with their relationships with some of the feeder teams in Ontario and Bobby Smirniotis' pedigree. But I do think that people expected FC Edmonton to be one of the better teams and more competitive teams because of its academy, because of its relationships, and because it existed. And I expected them to have the fan base would just come over, and they didn't. And I think there was this, I don't think what the CanPL recognized was that it was harder to market in Edmonton because there was a team before, because it's like a new league and you have to go through that whole team was off for a year and, what's a hiatus or semi-folded, whatever you want to call it, didn't exist, existed again. And all of a sudden we're not playing the New York Cosmos or the Tampa Bay Rowdies, which are names that are still somewhat familiar to people just because they're old NASL names, and having to almost re-educate the fans and the casual fan on what CanPL was. I actually think now in hindsight, and even I wouldn't have said this at the time, I wouldn't have said this in 2018 or 2019, but in hindsight, Edmonton was always going to be the hardest market for this league because of the existence of FC Edmonton in NASL beforehand. And I didn't realize that time, and I didn't recognize it at the time. I thought, oh yeah, we'll just have a El Clasico Battle of Alberta game with Cavalry and people will just flock to it. No, they haven't. They have not. It has not, the Canadian sports psyche is a weird one. That if you dangle New York, like, oh, we used to play the Cosmos in front of people. I've been accused of being an NASL apologist. I just see myself as a realist. And these are things that even I wouldn't have wanted to admit to myself to be true 2018, 2019. I was one of those people that wrote, people will just come because it's Calgary and Winnipeg playing in Edmonton, and these are natural rivalries. And I was wrong.
It takes a big man to admit that. I've never been wrong once in my life before, so I'm glad you could be that guy. Anyone who's seen the show knows I'm wrong all the time. John, yeah, you laugh now, but
oh, sorry, I didn't mute that. Oh, my bad.
Pay the consequences here. What are some of those initiatives you think, Steven, that they stopped that would have continued the growth of the team here? Oh, he's frozen here for a second by the looks of it. Hopefully we can get him back.
Okay.
Go.
I'm good. I'm here.
Oh, there you go. We're back.
Okay.
Yeah, what do you think some of those initiatives might have been that they dropped off on that were engaging the community more?
I think just simple promotion. There was like very little promotion, advertising of games. I mean, people just didn't even know this team was playing. There was very, very difficult. I mean, this year, the challenges because of COVID and because of certain teams is like, because of Forges, let's face it. And this Forges, their success. I'm not disparaging their success at all, but it forced a shuffling of a lot of games on the schedule. And it felt like FC Edmonton was always moving. I think they barely played, and it became a joke, they barely played a weekend game this year. Like, I mean, again, you're on top of a structure that's struggling. You're moving a bunch of Saturday, Sunday games to Tuesday and Wednesday nights, and so people were kind of like, "Oh, I don't even know when the team is playing. I don't know what's going on." And one thing I think CanPL struggled with is that in the modern day of sports, you have to promote personalities over teams. People need to know who they're cheering for. It's not enough. A jersey isn't enough anymore. A badge isn't enough anymore. They want to know who the players are, and I don't know if that's particularly because of the player movement or because the CanPL in itself and the union, they don't want to give the players the idea that they have more power than they do. They don't really promote who on these teams. They don't promote the players. Come see this player. Come see like Isan Ongera or Emir Didic play. Neither who are going to be back this year, but if you know what I'm trying to say, when you're talking about players from Edmonton that you might want to follow and why you want to follow their story, or you look at some of the players that this team brought in. What are their stories? Why did they come to Canada? I think it connected with people NASL because people knew the stories a little bit. Like, they knew the stories of like Daryl Fordyce, who's now with Valor, but when he played NASL, FC Edmonton's all-time leading scorer, comes with his family from Northern Ireland, decides to make a new life here, wants to become a Canadian citizen, talks about it with the media. People knew, and that really touched the fans. It wasn't just that he wanted to be here to play and fill the space. He wanted to become a Canadian. And that touched Tony Amiobi, same story. From the famous Amiobi family from Newcastle, right? One of the brothers marries someone here in Edmonton, falls in love with the city, makes it his home, right? Lives in a farm north of the city, living the rural lifestyle. But these are the stories that people gravitate to, and that makes you want to cheer for that player. It makes you want to buy that shirt, especially when you're not watching like Premier League level soccer, right? That you need to have that buy-in. And I think that CanPL, that's one thing that they've really struggled to do, is tell these player stories. And I don't know if that's because of the nature of one-year contracts and because of the nature of not wanting to really push the players forward. But I do think that that's some of the promotion that's missed. And I just think it's a basic. People don't know when the games are on. They don't know when it's happening. And the media have stopped paying attention to this team. Absolutely 100% stopped paying attention because they just didn't generate the reads and the interest enough that it was worth paying people to cover them. So I think there's a lot of things at work here, a lot of factors at play. And I think FC Edmonton started in some ways started with the hands tied behind their back. I mean, there was a lot of things that they wanted to do that I think as a club they came in thinking that they were going to be able to do that they weren't able to
do. You're painting a pretty bleak picture here, and it brings to mind the Peter Pocklington quote where he said he lost 10 million over 2 years when he initially had the Drillers. Is it possible that Edmonton's just not a market for professional soccer?
I don't believe so, because I think I think Edmonton's a great event city, and I think we saw that when they hosted two frigid World Cup qualifiers in November and how well people came out and how they embraced. But I think it needs to be that event. Edmonton, you have to build some pomp and circumstance around the game. And I think it can't just be something to do on a Sunday afternoon because you got nothing better to do. There has to be some pizzazz to it. There has to be some buy-in. And I think that's what the new owners are going to have to do when it comes to promotion and such. And they're going to have to give people that buy-in. And, obviously I was here when the Aviators went bankrupt in 2004. So, Edmonton has a long history of professional teams that have not done well. You mentioned the indoor drillers, who were just a ton of fun to watch for about 2-3 years. But again, really hard to bridge that gap. I think, obviously you're in Edmonton and you're in a city where the Oilers are such a dominant force in the media and what have you. And you have a small media. So, a lot of times, the staff guy, the people who are covering the Oilers during the summer, that's when they get their vacation time, right? And they're all gone. Like, this is when, because they're working overtime during the Oilers season, this is where you rack up the time, the time in lieu, and you're gone a little bit. So there's a lot of challenges, but nothing that I don't think can be overcome. But I do think that need to be more proactive, and I do think that I think there were so many positives that Edmonton was building on. The NASL was never going to survive the way it was going, but I think people forget some of the really good things that FC Edmonton did in the NASL. They had a national TV deal. Their games were on, and I'm saying that obviously, and I have to preclude that for people who don't know. I was the color person on those broadcasts, so there's some pride when I say this, and I have to, I don't want people to think I had no vested interest in that, because I obviously did, but games were on The Score, Sportsnet, or Sportsnet 360 on Sunday afternoons. They had a national TV deal before MLS teams did, just because of the nature. And I mean, you can argue because of the CanCon and whatever, why those games were on nationally, but they were. And they had a footprint. And, I think they were looking to build on some of those things. And some of those things they weren't able to do. Some of the things there were some things that I think worked against them. I do think that there were some things that the league, how shall I say, didn't necessarily make it easy for FC Edmonton to come into the league as an expansion. So I'd say that FC Edmonton started off with some significant challenges. As I mentioned, they kind of had to draft their own players, which was a bit weird at the time. They had a fractious relationship with the league regarding their academy. I think a lot of CanPL fans expected that all these teams would have academies, and actually it was the other way around. There was a lot of pressure on FC Edmonton from the start to not have their academy, and that's eventually came to pass. But that pressure came right from the start. As well, and I think people don't understand the investments the FATs put into the broadcast side. As I mentioned, the FC Edmonton games were broadcast from the NASL days, on a variety of platforms, including Sportsnet and even CBC sometimes. And again, I was on those broadcasts as a colored person, so I have to declare that I got a paycheck out of that. So there's obviously some feeling there, and I don't want people to think that because obviously if I didn't declare that, it would be wrong. So for transparency's sake, those broadcasts I was on for a long time and enjoyed doing them. And then coming into the league, FC Edmonton really believed that they were going to be doing their own broadcast still. And One Soccer is doing a great job, doing a tremendous job. And again, just like that, I have freelance for One Soccer in the past, so need to declare that as well. But they're doing a great job in bringing this national platform for soccer together. So in no way do I mean to disparage what they're doing, and I don't want to come off that way. But I do think that FC Edmonton believed that they were going to have control of their own broadcasts up to a very late point before the CanPL launched, and they'd spent a lot of money. The team had spent a lot of money upgrading its broadcasting facilities, upgrading its truck, everything for broadcasts for CanPL. That's the kind of money that's almost like a year's worth of players for on a roster that they'd spent. So when they found out that and don't get me wrong, again, the national television deal is a very important thing, but it created some problems because FC Edmonton spent money that they were for equipment they didn't need to use and that they didn't need to get. So, kind of hamstrung them from a little bit from the start. So just imagine FC Edmonton starting from a more negative financial position, already losing money from NASL, and taking on a couple of these things that they ended up spending more money that no other team spent money on. They would kind of start off in a bit of a negative position. And I know the critics out there are going to say, Steve, you covered FC Edmonton for a long time. You're being a homer. You're painting that in a light. And I'll be the first one to say yes, because I would say that there are also on-field decisions that were made that I think kind of hurt the team from the start. I do think there was a bit of a feeling at the team that, hey, we're just going to figure this out and we're going to be good right from the start. Because, we have all these resources to pull from and we're an existing team and we're going to pull guys from the NASL who we had relationships with and they're going to blow these CanPL kids out of the water. And that's not what happened. So, I think there's blame to lay on many sides, but I do think we have to ask, is this a Canadian sports fan thing? Is this a uniquely Edmonton thing? Is it a marketing thing? But why is it that Edmonton was able to get, and even the Ottawa Fury, let's go back to the Ottawa Fury, when they played NASL, why were they able to get big crowds out when Minnesota and New York came to town? And they can't replicate that when Canadian teams come to town. We need to talk about that psyche as Canadian sports fans. That if we're going to talk about Canadian leagues and Canadian things and Canadian leagues being successful, we can't be pining to play New York and Los Angeles all the time. We need to, and I would argue, I would say that mentally, I see all the scars behind you. If TFC, let's say, we're going to tell their fans next year they're playing the Canadian Premier League and leaving MLS. Now I'm saying FC Edmonton's a much smaller scale thing. And NASL is a league that collapsed. It's not a league they left. But so different situations, but still psychologically for the casual fan, we like to say that term, casual fan, that used to see FC Edmonton play the New York Cosmos and Tampa Bay Rowdies. How do you think Toronto FC would sell the idea of playing Cavalry and FC Edmonton and Valor a bunch of times and not playing LAFC or New York City FC or, Atlanta United ever again? How would their marketing department reconcile that? How would you do that? And if you can't answer that question, it's really hard to sort of point the finger back at FC Edmonton and say, you screwed that up, because that's a tough thing. Ask any Montreal fan or Vancouver Whitecaps fan the same question. If Vancouver Whitecaps or Montreal have to go back a division again to play all the time, not just in Canadian championships in a CanPL format, how many of their fans would leave? How many fans would come with them? And that, I think, is an interesting question to ask or answer. And I think philosophically, that's why I go back to that argument I make about FC Edmonton being actually the biggest challenge for this league. That Edmonton was the most challenging market. Because I would never imagine a challenge bigger than, let's say, moving Toronto FC from MLS to CanPL, hypothetically, and telling that fan base that, Halifax Wanderers on a Sunday afternoon, this is, and there's no more LAFC and there's no more New York City FC and there's no more Atlanta United coming to town. So I don't know. I don't know how that works, but FC Edmonton is a much smaller scale version of that. But I do think that there are some applicable parts of that analogy.
I think John had one more before we let you go here. Again, thank you so much for taking this chunk of time out of your day. I know you're a busy guy.
Well, yeah, I had kind of planned to pick a bit more into roster, but I know you've already kind of touched on that there's not really there's a lot of unknowns there. Because I was wondering, is it waiting for one boot to drop thing before, are we gonna get a slew of announcements? Because there's a month away from the season now, so at some point we have to get some sort of updates on what the team's gonna look like, right? Is it literally gonna be game one here, guess surprise, or when can we expect something, or is it impossible to answer?
Well, they have to have a team, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's gonna they've announced a game. They know that they're playing the first game. They announced it before the Canada game against El Salvador. So we know there's a game. There's like we've heard crickets on the roster, and I think that's by design. But I do think that it's that in a lot of ways there's going to be dribs and drabs coming in from other teams, players who may not fit, who are going to be able to work for, let's face it, league minimum salaries or what have you. Or I said a lot of loans. I see a lot of loans being the thing, and of course, loans are things that are generally done the last second before season start. These are guys that you kind of figure out aren't going to quite fit in with our team, so now we have to put them out on loan. And I think that's going to be, it's going to be a lot about building relationships, and of course, that puts your roster always in a state of flux too, because loans can be recalled depending on what kind of loan it is, or it could be rules on them on when they play and what have you, and. I think you're selling a team based on very short-term contracts and loans until there's stability found on who's going to be administering this team down the road. So I think that I think right now it's very much a placeholder, this team in the league until that happens. And I go back to my first point, I dare you to find me a league administered team, whether it was an NASL or in hockey or in any sport, that when a team has to go this route that is good, it's just not going to happen. No one's going to pay the salaries for a team to beat his or her team. You're going to pay just enough that they can field a team and be viable, but you're not. If you think those players are that good, you're going to keep them for your team. You're not going to send them to another team in the league.
Well, on that note, Steven, again, thank you so very much for taking the time to do this, and we really look forward to any news, I guess, out of Edmonton.
I just think this is the first big litmus test for this league. This really is. I think there's been a lot of good news stories. I mean, they've survived through COVID. I think what Forge has done internationally has been a great story for this league. I think there's been some other really unique stories, but we always knew. I think we all knew that a challenge was going to come at some point where it rocks the league to the foundations. And I think this is the one. I think this is the first real existential threat to the league, because obviously sponsors look at it, people look at it from outside and say, you have a team that's wobbling now. How are you going to fix it? And, in Canadian terms, not in world terms. In world terms, Edmonton is a mid-market city. But in Canadian terms, Edmonton is, I think, Canada's 5th largest city. So it's not like a small center. In Canadian terms, so it's as you kind of figure, it's a metro of more than 1 million people. It should be able to, by just demographics alone, find a way to sell 3,000-4,000 seats, but definitely more than 500 people for a game.
Well, time will tell, as we like to say on this show, and we can really only hope for the best. So. Hopefully we chat with you again soon, Steven, and thanks again. We do, like I said before, we really do appreciate you taking the time. All right, guys, we are back. Thank you so much for Steven Sandor for taking the time to chat with us there about all the things developing within the Canadian Premier League, especially focused on what's going on with FC Edmonton and their trials and tribulations. One group that we're going to get into a real great discussion with, who are pushing things forward in Canadian soccer, are the Brain Trust at the League One Ontario level here in Ontario. And we're going to get to an interview in just a second from, he's not even commissioner anymore. Here I was about to go and not give him his due. The executive chairman, hopefully he got a raise. He told us he got a new chair, so that's positive. Yeah, the executive chairman of League One Ontario, Dino Rossi, and the director of women's football, Chelsea Spencer. And we'll be back in just a second with that. All right, guys, we're back with another exciting interview here. We've got executive chairman of League One Ontario, Dino Rossi, and Chelsea Spencer, the director of women's football for League One Ontario. They've had some really exciting news that's just come out with the plan that's set up for 2024. And we're going to get into that. We're going to get into a bunch of other stuff, but we want to start with that plan. And I know this is exciting news for everyone in Canada, especially fans of the lower leagues and the development of our player programming in this country. If you could, just give us a quick rundown of why this is so important. And I'll leave that open to either of you guys.
Yeah, you can start if you'd like. Yeah.
No problem, Chelsea. I think, Pierce, any league as it grows and evolves, you're forced to make some decisions about how you're going to manage that growth. And we've experienced enormous expansion over the 8 years of operations. We're going into our 9th now. You've been around for a while, Pierce. You remember we started this off with just 10 teams in 2014. We added our women's league in 2015. I think we had 7 teams that first season. This year, we've got on track to have 40 teams between our men's and women's divisions on the Premier side. Plus, we've introduced our reserve league and a new U19 league that in total will see us having well over 110 teams. When you see that kind of scale and you try to envision what the future looks like, and you try to put this league on its best footing, you start to think outside the box. And what we came to the conclusion a couple of years ago as a leadership group was that continuing to just bring new clubs into the top rung of the league was not really just going on based on just an expansion model. People apply, they get accepted, was not going to be sustainable in the long term. So we started working on what was going to be called the 2023 plan, but COVID-19 had different ideas for us, and has become the 2024 plan, whereby we will create a pyramid of competition for the L1 umbrella of clubs, whereby we'll have a Premier Division of 10 to 12 teams, depending on the gender, a Championship Division below that, and then a newly created League 2, which is where our reserve teams will play. It won't be called a reserve league anymore. They will play in League 2. And then all new clubs that we bring into the ecosystem will come up through League 2 and have to earn their way to higher levels of play via merit, by winning and being promoted, as opposed to being parachuted in.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess that was something I was curious about, because it looks like over the next 2 seasons, essentially, you're going to I saw the way you're going to have 75% and then 100. So you kind of have those 22 teams, at least on the men's side, that are basically kind of jostling for those spots for 2024. And then I was curious about League 2, like exactly like, do you at this point have any idea of like, how many teams are we looking at? Like, is there a cap? Is there a minimum number you need, or like how League 2 is going to kind of be set up at that stage?
Well, what I can say is that you encapsulated how we're going to populate those top 2 tiers perfectly. We've got a 2-year competition, the 2022 and 2023 seasons. All the teams that are in the Premier Division will battle it out. So the points that they earn not only, hopefully help them qualify for the playoffs and hopefully win the league on the women's and men's side, but it also counts towards where they'll be placed in 2024. And yeah, we made the decision that it would make sense to make the points in this first season worth a little bit less, because obviously this is new and teams are going to need a little bit of time to ramp up. We have some new clubs joining the league this year, so it puts a little tiny bit less emphasis on the 2022 results and makes 2023 a fight to the finish, right? So it's everything. It's going to all count there. League 2 we've got a lot of reserve teams. Every club in our league has a reserve team, male and female. So those teams will be in that league. So that'll automatically give you on day 1, 22 teams on the men's side and 18 teams on the women's side. And then furthermore, we expect that there will be some clubs. We've had a number of clubs want to join the league, and we have paused all new expansion. So I'm expecting, I think we all are, Chelsea, all our entire board, is that there will be a queue of clubs in 2024 wanting to be part of this new structure and have their opportunity to work their way through it. So, is there an exact number today? No, we don't, but we will. We know for sure it'll be around 22 on the men's side and around 18 on the women's side to start, and I expect it to be higher than that when we kick off in earnest in 2024.
Now, as far as the women's game is concerned on this, what's the impetus been? And I apologize, I'm stealing John's question here. But what's been the impetus to put in the structuring of everything, what we've seen with BC League One, and guarantee that there's equality and that the women get a team if the men get a team in each league? Or is there anything like that in the works, or is that how we're scheduling this out?
Dino, I'm going to let you, well,
I can handle it if you want to.
oh, that would be great.
We don't have a strict rule that says you must have a team in the women's division if you have a team in the men's division. But as you can see, almost all do. There's a small number of clubs grandfathered in from our early days that simply don't operate women's programs at this point. But I fully expect that over time that's going to change. The women's game is on the rise, and you'll see some news coming out in the coming days where groups that started off on the men's side are going to be adding a women's Premier Division team. So slowly but surely, we expect that we're going to achieve equality in that way. And I don't want to speak for Chelsea, but I know that that's a big priority for our board.
I think organically it's kind of happening just merely because women are in the forefront of soccer right now, especially in Canada. There are so many women and girls that want to play soccer. So naturally the numbers seem to be there. And then I also think with this new plan for 2024, you'll see the quality increase as well, which is exactly what we want for both the men and women in League One.
That makes sense. So you hinted that there's going to be some news coming out about programming being offered for women from some of the teams that we hadn't seen offered previously. And then with that also that we're not going to see new expansion until 2024. But I've seen teams like Cambridge, for example, announcing that they've got teams entering in League One. Is that because they were already allowed in previously and it just wasn't announced, or what's going on with that, I guess?
League One has a partnership with Ontario Soccer, whereby as part of our commitment to the talented pathway and connecting the youth talented pathway with the adult level talented pathway, we invite guest teams from OPDL programs that are not already League One license holders to be able to enter teams in our reserve league. So groups like London Whitecaps, Cambridge, as you mentioned, Burlington Soccer Club, Oakville Soccer Club, and a couple of others that apologize, but I'm blanking on right now. Brampton, for instance. Those clubs are allowed, if they meet certain criteria, are allowed to enter a team per gender in our reserve league, and it's all part of our long-term partnership with Ontario Soccer.
Is there going to be any kind of a rule put in place as far as how many teams a club is allowed to enter into each various division? Because I've seen there's like just as an example, there's Sigma 1, Sigma 2, Oakville A, Oakville B, just multiple teams. Is that going to be whittled down, or are you going to have it so that a team can be entered from a club, multiple teams could be entered from the same club, but they have to be in different divisions, or what's going to happen with that?
Our standing rule is that a full license holder in League One, so those 22 men's teams, those 18 women's teams, they are permitted to enter up to 2 reserve teams. So most of our clubs are opting to have one team in the, like let's say on the men's side, it's a U21 reserve league. They'll have one team there, and they might opt to have a team in the U19 league that we just launched. So that gives them a fairly significant player pool at the senior level to work with, and it's a good continuation from the youth talented pathway. On the women's side, our reserve league is open age. We won't be offering a U19 league yet on the women's side. That hopefully will kick off in 2023. But we have a very big reserve league. And again, you have some clubs who have a big enough player pool that they can enter 2 teams, but they are capped at 2 teams below the first team.
Now, Dino, you've been around a long time, and I'll circle back around to you with the similar question here. But Chelsea, having been out and seen you getting your hands dirty and attending games and getting to know what the product is and who's doing what everywhere, what have been maybe the top 2 things that really impressed you about what you saw at ground level with League One Ontario?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, the professionalism on launching on game day. I think that just shows you how each club takes pride in the product that they're putting out, which, comes from the top. And it's, Dino creating that product from the start, and then the reputation that's been maintained and the standard that's been maintained throughout the years of League One being launched. That for me was very impressive. Coming from a high-level soccer background, I am pretty picky when I see things and how I observe soccer being played, but also, the game day operations are something that people kind of overlook. But for me, that was very impressive. And then to see players that I've played with still competing and the quality still being there within each group. Like, I wouldn't say that there's one team that's stacked more than the other. The sprinkle of talent throughout the league is very nice. It's very nice to see. And I think it lends to the league itself, showing that people or players are still attracted to want to play and choose League One as their number one spot to compete.
So Dino, I'm going to restructure this question for you, okay? Just slightly. Since you've been here from day one, what are the developments that you saw last year that impressed you over years previous? Because you've seen it from infancy to, we'll call this toddlerhood, because we expect it to continue to go on. But in that development, what were some of the things last year that really caught your eye? Because this is just from my perspective, Roma, St. Catharines Roma Wolves, bringing in 400 people, 500 people, however many it was, to their opening day match was really impressive, because we haven't seen that as far as I can tell. So that's kind of where I'm going with this. What are the things that kind of made your eyes open a little wider and think, oh wow, we've really got something on the go here?
Okay, well, last year, all things considered, the fact that we actually even had a season, frankly, was a minor miracle. I don't have to rehash how difficult COVID-19 has been to the Ontario soccer community, the Canadian soccer community in general. So for our clubs to even get off the mat and with very little time to get ready, be able to launch a season, I think we stood the league up in less than 30 days. So that was quite a monumental feat. And then we had some new clubs join. Even if, a club like Roma, as you mentioned, it was supposed to be their first year. They made a decision to enter in a special competition we created just for 2021. That was a short summer season because our season started late, so it ran late. That didn't work for all of our clubs. But they did such a great job, and it was really exciting. Waterloo had some really passionate fans and a good team out there. we had 1812 that they had their challenges because it was so difficult. COVID-19 shut them out of their home field, but they put a team together and were very competitive. And I could go on and on. There was a lot of excitement, but we one thing you're going to see going forward is we're putting a bigger emphasis on organizations coming into League One who are able to deliver that type of game day experience that Chelsea rightly spoke about, that creates excitement in the community, where the club is very much connected to its community. People want to come out and support, not just opening day, but throughout the season, and it's fun and they're entertained, and it's important to the people in that municipality, in that region, that there is a vibrant club that is providing an exciting and much needed pathway for the talented young players, female and male, in their communities. So those are priorities going forward, and we're going to want to see more environments like the one that Roma created across the league. And I'm expecting with some of our new clubs like Electric City, like Simcoe County, that you're going to see clubs who have very much a entertainment orientation when it comes to how they interact with their community and the show they put on game day.
Now, I know John's got to get to his phone call with his doctor here, so we're fairly limited by time. So I'll let him get in a question or two.
Sure. Yeah. So I was just thinking, as you kind of answered that, just thinking about COVID and like challenges. And so I guess, here we are, we've announced kind of like your structure and your plan for the next 2 years. And when you look forward from now until then, like what do you see as the biggest, is that okay? Biggest challenges or hurdles kind of like in between now and 2024?
I think we've gotten past the worst of it. When we've spoken to our clubs in recent weeks as we're gearing up for the 2022 season, our message is return to normalcy, or as close as possible to it. I think the biggest challenge we might have going forward might be around facilities, as some facilities are still a bit hesitant to open up to outside groups. Which we hope we can overcome in the coming weeks, as the province seems intent to remove more restrictions, which would be great if they make sense from a public health standpoint. But the vibe, and Chelsea, correct me if you think I'm wrong, but the vibe around the league is that everybody is really excited. People can't wait to get back on the pitch, and that they're excited to welcome fans back and to really create a lot of excitement and momentum. And the 2024 plan, I think, is it's creating a lot of buzz, and amongst players, amongst coaches, amongst people who follow clubs. And with the injection of a few new teams, like we said, I think this what 2022 has in front of it is mostly just positive. I don't foresee any major challenges. We've gone through and survived what could have been crippling, and we were, like I said earlier, being able to just play in 2021 was a minor miracle. We got through it, and now it's time to plow ahead and just keep building.
All right. Well, on that note, I'm going to ask Chelsea, what do you think the biggest hurdle is on the women's side? Or what has you most excited? You can take your pick of those two, but what's the biggest challenge in that sense that either needs to be solved or has you excited to get down to?
Okay. There's always areas of growth and improvement, which is something, the board and I have discussed at length when it comes to the women's side. But I'm going to go with excitement. So what I'm excited about is obviously this expansion, but also, seeing that the players are so excited. So I know that we've done some interviews with our veteran players like April Simon and Laura Tweidel, to see how many players are so invested in this new plan has me very excited. So, they're bought in, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how the league grows, and how the competition structure breeds more quality players. My vision for the women's side is that we continue to attract quality players and bring players home that may be playing elsewhere to compete in this league and continue to grow the women's game. All eyes are on League One right now, and I think that's the most exciting piece for me.
How far away are we from having a team step up, do you think, and actually start paying some of these women? Because the infrastructure is there, is it not, Dino, for someone to start handing out contracts?
Nothing stops a club from declaring as a professional club and registering the requisite number of professional contracts to declare as to actually be recognized as a pro club. I think it's fair to say that the number one hurdle in that regard is the realities of the NCAA amateur status regulations. So as the rules are currently written, a player, female or male, that trains or plays alongside a professional player after they have started their NCAA career would render them ineligible. And especially on the women's side, where so many of our players are playing down south, those scholarships are quite lucrative. Clubs are loath to jeopardize that status. Now, will a club step forward and decide that, you know what, we're just going to not have NCAA players? We are going to maybe populate our roster only with U Sports players and pros, because U Sports players obviously still have to be amateur, but U Sports doesn't have those same rules that the NCAA has. That's a strategic decision a club wants to make. But to that point, let's say in general, there is a strong commitment amongst our board that the time has come for a plan to be in place to add a professional tier to the women's game, whether it be at our level or at a higher level. The time is here. It has to happen. And we want to play our part, however small or big it might be, to make that happen. So, let's stay tuned and let's see what can come over the next couple of years, because I think the opportunity is right in front of us to make that big step.
Well, as someone who's heavily invested in what goes on with this league, I'm thrilled to hear that you guys have this exciting plan on the go. And I really look forward to what's in store for this year. And I just wanted to say thank you both so much for joining us today. And we look forward to following along with your exploits throughout the season. And hopefully we'll be able to get you both back on ahead of the playoffs.
Well, guys, as always, thank you so much for listening. Big thank you to our guests. Some great discussions had today. And tune in next week for more Canadian Footy Corner.
Canadian Footy Corner.